Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and we're here after the 1 week break to break down UFC Nashville, which goes down this weekend in Nashville. It's a fight night. It's a good card from top to bottom. There's plenty of fun fights. I think there's going to be a lot of finishes as well. And also, I think the theme for this card, essentially, at least for the top of the division, is we've got, younger fighters that are surging up versus the experienced, savvy vets on the other side. So we do have a number of experience versus youth and prospect fights, and those are always the interesting fights because, again, you can sort of claim that maybe a loss for the veteran and they potentially might be on a decline, or if it's the other way around and it's a loss for the prospect, maybe they were there a little bit too quickly and they had that veteran test and didn't pass it. So they're always interesting fights when you get experience versus youth, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to the card. I genuinely think for a fight night, it doesn't have a lot of star quality from a name perspective, like a household name perspective. So your casual fans will probably be learning a lot about some fighters this weekend, whereas of course the hardcore fans will know all the fighters from top to bottom. So yeah, it's an interesting card. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, if you want to jump into the action, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a gambler that likes written breakdowns to understand why we're selecting certain fighters for recommended bets. We have that recommended bet section for you, and that includes some betting strategy options as well, so you can play different types of strategies depending on what you fancy on the night. We've also got a fun gambler section, so if you are somebody that just likes to bet the fun parlays, maybe you want us to build the parlays for you, maybe you want to build your own parlays, we've got both of those sections in the fun gambler section. And then we've got the official bet section, so if you're somebody that just wants to tail where the professional handicapper is putting his money, which is myself, we've got that official bet section for you as well. And of course, with all of our betting subscriptions comes Base AI, which is our UFC prediction software. It's on an absolute heater right now. It's been great all year. It's just producing great results week after week, plenty of underdogs it picks as well every week as well, so super interesting from that perspective. And like I say, we don't charge separately for that. Everything's in one subscription, everything's in one package. You just need to choose whether you want one event, whether you want to pay monthly, or whether you want to take advantage of our super saver option of the annual subscription. So again, if you want to jump into the action this weekend, make sure you hit up MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promo out the way, let's get down to breaking some fights down. And as always, we will start in the main event. We've got 5 rounds, not sure we need them, in the heavyweight division between Derrick the Black Beast Lewis versus Tallison Teixeira. Now again, like I mentioned in the introduction, this is one of the experience versus youth type of fights. Like Tallison Teixeira, he's so young for a heavyweight. Like, he's not going to hit his peak for quite a while, so he's definitely got a massive head start on his career being in the UFC at this stage, whereas Derrick Lewis, on the other hand, of course, is an aging fighter, but I don't think that he's a fighter that's like in a massive decline or anything like that. And somebody like Lewis is probably going to be able to go on for quite a while as well, because one of his biggest traits and attributes as a fighter is, of course, that brutal power that he's got. He's one of the hardest hitters. You could say MMA, but he's definitely one of the hardest hitters in the world, whether you're looking at MMA or any other sport or human being. Like, the dude just packs so much power. And the thing is, with a decline in this sport, is the power's the last thing to leave you. So of course you need your speed and movement, but this is another thing. Like, Derrick Lewis, for a big guy and for an aging guy, he's still like super athletic, again, especially for a heavyweight. Like, he doesn't have that Francis Ngannou type of body type, but he's super athletic, he's super explosive, he's still got power, so he's always going to be live to win a fight. Well, any fight in the UFC. It's just certain styles can become a little bit problematic for him. Now, in this fight with Teixeira, so Teixeira is obviously going to have the youth. I think there's 14 years difference between them, so that is some serious youth there. He's also got a height advantage, reach advantage as well. The height advantage is quite, significant. The reach advantage is it is significant, but it's not as big. But there's still, like I say, the youth, the height, and the reach advantages on Teixeira, which, when you're looking at probabilities and the likelihood of a fighter winning a fight, when you've got those three things on your side, you're normally favoured quite heavily to win a fight, which Tallison Teixeira is. Like Derrick Lewis is pushed him to, like a plus 200 underdog. So I do get it from that perspective. But on the other side, like, Lewis has got a massive experience edge over Teixeira, like a huge experience edge, to the point of Lewis has got more UFC knockout wins than Teixeira has professional MMA fights. So that tells you everything you need to know from the experience perspective. And Derrick Lewis has been fighting, beating and losing against the best fighters in the world in the heavyweight division for many, many years now. And like I say, it's not as if he's on this, obvious decline where he's just getting knocked out every fight. Like, he is kind of a kill or be killed type of fighter. Like, he can be got at, but man, you can't just stand there and take punches off him. Now, where I kind of worry a little bit for Teixeira here is with how he fights defensively from a striking defensive perspective. Like, I said this prior to him coming into the UFC. So if you go back to the podcast that I recorded for his UFC debut, it was against Tafa, and I said the same thing. Like, my concern is you watch tape outside of the UFC, and Teixeira gets into these brawls with smaller fighters, and it's a bit like, from a range management perspective, Teixeira's tall and long. Like, he could... That's one area of his development, in my opinion, that he could develop, like just using his range, staying on the outside, keeping his distance. But he does like to get into these close brawls with opponents, even if they're much shorter than him. And that's a real concern, because in the tape that I've watched, he does get hit with a couple of big shots in brawls as well. So here against Derrick Lewis, if he does that, if he gets into an exchange in boxing range and goes punch for punch with Derrick Lewis, at that point, the fight becomes pretty much a coin flip. It does. It becomes a 50-50 fight, because it's whichever one lands first. And, Teixeira's got power, of course he has. He's also good in the clinch as well with elbows and knees. But to get into that clinch from the boxing range, you've got to get through the punches within boxing range. And man, Lewis just packs so much power, especially in that short range. I just think if this turns into a fight where, there's a lot of action inside boxing range, maybe because Tallison Teixeira is either engaging in the exchanges, or if he wants to get through boxing range to the clinch, I just feel that he's going to be putting himself in so much danger in doing that. For me, where Teixeira should take this fight and should play this fight out is at range. Teep kicks to the body of Lewis, firing the kicks to the body of Lewis, firing the straight punches from a little bit further out than Lewis can reach, because at that stage Lewis will probably get a little bit frustrated, will probably start to overcommit himself, and then Teixeira can use that to play into his game, counter strike, time Lewis coming in. But again, like, I just don't know if Teixeira is going to play that rangy game, the game that he should play, because, the evidence that we've seen historically is he likes to get his hands dirty and get into that boxing range. So I kind of feel that Derrick Lewis is really live in this fight, and it's also the typical type of fight where, a young hyped up fighter in a division is fighting that vet for the first time. Like, if Teixeira had already had that first veteran loss in the UFC, I might be looking at this in a different way, but he hasn't. And I kind of think this might be the veteran loss for him. So I think, look, with the way Teixeira fights, I think it plays into Derrick Lewis's style. And I think, to be fair, Teixeira's going to get the fight he wants as well, in regards to it being a stand-up fight. But I can just see Derrick Lewis just landing something clean inside a boxing exchange and putting Teixeira out. And I don't think that's a hot take. I genuinely think that's a probable outcome. So I am going to side with the underdog here. I'm picking Derrick Lewis to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got another veteran versus surging prospect fight. We've got Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Gabriel Bonfim. Now, this fight is a 3-round co-main event. I would have liked it to be 5 rounds, actually. I don't know whether it would have gone a full 5 rounds or even past 3 rounds. We will see on the night, but I'd have liked the opportunity for it to go 5 rounds, purely just to see where Gabriel Bonfim's at in a 5-round fight at this level in the UFC, because at some point soon, like, I've been raving about Bonfim for a while, and I wasn't one of those people that discredited discredited him as a fighter after the Nicholas Dolby fight either. Like, it was just one of those fights where Bonfim fought that veteran and took the loss. And, you know, Bonfim is an unbelievable talent, super athletic, sharp boxing. You know, my only criticism of him is he can probably take a few or eat a few punches that you maybe wouldn't want him to. But other than that, like I say, good mover, sharp boxing. The grappling is at an absolute elite level. He's quick on the feet, quick movement, quick strikes. Like, Bonfim's a serious prospect in the division. So I would have liked the UFC to have booked him over 5 rounds against somebody like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who has fought 5 rounds so many times in the UFC. I think that would have been the right move. But look, as for how this fight plays out and the styles, for Stephen Thompson, for Wonderboy, he's going to be the better striker here, technically. Like, even at his age still, like the level of striking that he's got, he's just an elite striker. And I think if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think Bonfim could struggle. He'll have his moments, he'll land on Thompson, but I do think he could struggle from a striking perspective, just because Wonderboy is such an awkward, elusive type of striker. It's so hard to replicate. And you know, I've said for years, many other people have as well, that he's just a puzzle inside the cage. And no matter how much you prepare in your fight camp, in your 8-week fight camp prior to fighting him, you just do not know what you're going to be dealing with until you get inside the cage, because there's nobody that you can bring in that replicates exactly what he does. So he is a puzzle to solve. And he's a puzzle that you don't solve throughout fight camp. He's a puzzle you solve inside the cage. But the issue with Wonderboy is, look, years ago, so going back 4, 5, 6 years, like, his takedown defense was good. You know, he could get back up to his feet. He could always keep fights standing. And that was one of his main traits, especially from a defensive perspective, because he needs fights standing to win fights. So he could always keep the fight on the feet. Whereas the older he's got and the longer he's been in the UFC, you do start to see the cracks and the holes in that wrestling defense and the grappling defense as well, to the point where, you know, you look at Belal Muhammad, he won via wrestling and grappling. You look at Gilbert Burns, he won easily via wrestling and grappling. And you just feel that Bonfim, I don't think he's going to be too hesitant of the strikes coming from Stephen Thompson at him. I don't think he's going to be too hesitant, you know, exchanging with Wonderboy. And what that's going to allow him to do is punch himself into range, into a good close range where he can shoot a takedown, maybe against the cage, get a body lock and drag him down. Because again, Bonfim, you know, his wrestling is good, but I think it would serve him better here, just getting double underhooks, getting that strong body lock, and then just dragging Stephen Thompson down against the cage. And I think once Bonfim's on top, I don't see Wonderboy being able to get back up to his feet easily at all. So, like I say, on the feet striking, if it's a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I do think Wonderboy's got massive advantages and it will be extremely competitive, extremely close, and Bonfim might struggle, but it's mixed martial arts, and I think Bonfim, with how aggressive he is and how fast he is, I think he's going to punch his way into distance, sort of disregard the strikes from Wonderboy. You know, what I mean by that is maybe eat a couple of strikes clean just to be able to close that distance, but I do think that Bonfim gets the takedowns and the top control time that he needs here. I think he'll either finish Wonderboy with a submission, or he'll be able to do that for at least 2 out of the 3 rounds and take a decision. So for those reasons, I'm picking Gabriel Bonfim to win this fight. And in the next fight, another experience versus surging prospect type of fight. We've got Calvin Kattar versus Steve Garcia. Now, I say surging prospect, like Steve Garcia is on a massive win streak right now. He's knocking everybody out. That's his main win condition. And then on the other side, Calvin Kattar's on a massive losing streak. And, you know, people are talking about the decline. And look, when you go on a 4-fight losing streak, you normally cut from the UFC. But with a loss here for Kattar, a 5-fight losing streak is borderline unheard of. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this fight plays out. And if Kattar does lose, does the UFC give him another opportunity on a 5-fight losing streak? It could, from a mentality perspective, it could be a very tough fight for Kattar, you know, knowing that he's got to win, because if he doesn't, it's unlikely. Like I say, you can never say never. It's just unlikely the UFC keep a fighter that's on a 5-fight losing streak. But in regards to the fighters that Kattar's losing against, they're all fighters that are on a completely different level to Steve Garcia. Now, admittedly, some of those fighters are fighters that you would have expected Kattar to be winning sort of like 3-4 years ago. But right now, like I say, it's not that Kattar's in his prime now. Obviously, he's took a little bit of a dip in regards to, himself as a fighter and the skill set. But I just don't think there's obvious signs of decline. I don't think you can be confident in saying that with the fighters that he's losing against, because he's genuinely losing against fighters at the top of the division, fighters that are surging, fighters that are really, really good from a skill set perspective. Whereas Steve Garcia, you can't discredit the massive win streak that he's on, but the fighters that he's beating just isn't on that level, of Kattar or the fighters that Kattar's losing against either, which makes this fight super interesting. And the betting line's really close as well. Like, some books do have Kattar as the slight underdog. Some books have the fight as a dead even pick 'em. I kind of feel that we're going to see a lot of movement. It wouldn't shock me to see Kattar probably go into the fight as a slight favourite, so I think the line might flip. But like I say, it's a real tough fight, but I don't think you can be confident in saying that Kattar's declined to a point that Steve Garcia's going to run through him here. Because this is the other thing, like I've already alluded to, Steve Garcia's main win condition in this fight is by knockout. Like, Steve Garcia, when he wins fights, he gets knockouts, very rarely wins by decision. So when you're looking at Calvin Kattar, well, Kattar's only got one recorded KO TKO loss on his record. But go and look into that. That was the Arnold Allen fight, and that was actually an injury. He wasn't knocked out, or he wasn't dropped hard and then finished. Like, look at the damage that this dude can take. Look at the Max Holloway fight. Like, that's how tough Kattar is. So the fact that Kattar's essentially never been knocked out, and Steve Garcia, when he wins, it's by knockout. You put 2 and 2 together and you're not quite getting 4 there, because you've got to assume that if Garcia wins this fight, he knocks Kattar out. And we've never seen that. And also, from a technical perspective, Kattar should be the better striker in this fight. Technically, like, sure, Garcia's got this sneaky power, comes out fast, comes out hard, starts super, super quick. Kattar's probably going to have to weather a storm in this fight. But, if Kattar can get past that initial surge, that initial, flurry from Garcia and not get caught with anything, I think the longer the fight goes on, the more Kattar works his way into the fight. We might see a little bit of wrestling from Kattar as well. Kattar defensively, from a wrestling perspective, we saw in the Aljo fight, wasn't quite there. But again, like, Steve Garcia's not Aljamain Sterling. So I think we could see a little bit of everything from Kattar. I think early in this fight, Kattar might have, a couple of defensive issues where, he's just got to bide his time and do what he needs to do to get through that initial storm. But I think Kattar's the better quality fighter. I think it's unlikely for someone at Kattar's level to go on a 5-fight losing streak. I just feel that, he's had the 4-fight losing streak. He's now took a massive step down in competition against somebody who is surging. I just think it's the right time for Kattar to get back in the win column. I think that, again, you're looking at Kattar and you could argue that this is a levels type of fight. And I do think he's a level above Steve Garcia. He's just got to mind his P's and Q's, because you can't just discredit Garcia's power just because you've never been knocked out. He's got to manage it and deal with it. But like I say, he's an experienced fighter, a veteran. He's got a good team around him as well. So I do think he can get through that initial storm, not get knocked out, and then, really cruise against Garcia. So for those reasons, I'm picking Calvin Kattar to win this fight. Next up, this is one of my favourite fights on the entire card. We've got Nate Landwehr versus Morgan Charriere. Now, Morgan Charriere is a fighter that I've liked a lot for a lot of years. I watched him all through Cage Warriors. Really enjoyable fighter. Always been fighting at a high level. Not always got the result that he should have got, and sometimes he's had some off performances, but like, he's the type of fighter that if you allow him to cruise, he'll cruise technically and he'll just slowly, methodically, work through you. Whereas if you're a fighter that pushes him and forces him to fight, like, the dude turns into a different guy. He's like electric in there. And I think that's what we're going to get here, because Nate Landwehr is just crazy, man. Like, He'll come forwards, he'll be in your face. If it means him eating 3 of your punches just to land one himself, he's absolutely going to do that. You know, he fights for the fans, he fights for entertainment. He's a real entertaining fighter. You know, bleeds pretty much every fight as well. And I just feel that Landwehr, with the way he fights, is going to bring the absolute best out of Morgan Charriere. And that's actually a problem for Landwehr. Like, I think Landwehr is as crazy as it sounds, and I hope this doesn't happen because it won't be as entertaining, but I think Landwehr just, you know, dialing it down a gear or two, taking it down a gear or two, and just, again, trying to be methodic and slow himself, and, you know, just work into the fight and be super calculated. I think that's the way he probably gets at Morgan Charriere. But, you know, we know that Nate the Train does not fight like that. So with him coming forwards and putting everything on Charriere, I think it's just going to force Charriere to be the best version of himself. The best version of Charriere, you get good boxing, you get hard low kicks, you get wrestling, you get good topside grappling, ground and pound. I just think we're going to see a true mixed martial arts fight here. We're going to see striking, we're going to see wrestling, we're going to see grappling, we're going to see knockdown, submission attempts. I think we're going to see it all in this fight. But the bottom line is, in that type of high-paced fight, when it comes down to bringing the best out of a fighter, I just think the best version of Charriere is better than the best version of Landwehr. So for those reasons, I'm picking Morgan Charriere to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an interesting one. We've got Vitor Petrino versus Austen Lane. Now, the reason it's super interesting is because Vitor Petrino is making his UFC heavyweight debut. Now, this is a light heavyweight who is a big stacked light heavyweight, by the way. I just did not expect Petrino to be moving up to heavyweight. Like, the dude's an absolute unit at light heavyweight, so what are we going to see at heavyweight? Like, I'm just interested in so many things. The frame of him, how big he's going to actually be, what he's going to weigh as well. Like, can you imagine if Petrino came in at 265 pounds on the dot? Like, the dude would just look insanely massive at 265 pounds. But I'm not sure he will get there. If I'm gonna throw my hat on a number, I'd probably say anywhere around 240, maybe 245, or, you know, maybe £5 either way of 240. So anywhere from 235 to 245. I think that's roughly where we're going to see him at. But like I say, you know, ask me where I want to see him. Well, I want to see him cutting down to 265 pounds because the dude would just be a unit. So I actually think it's a good move for him as well. Like, at light heavyweight, he started really strong. He was hyped, and, you know, it kind of didn't work out for him once he started fighting the experienced fighters. But up at heavyweight, I actually think he's going to have a lot of advantages, especially if he does come in at like 235, 240 pounds. He's going to have such a speed advantage, movement advantage, but then he's going to be super explosive, and you know he's going to carry his power up as well. Like, you know that's going to be a thing. But then he's got his wrestling as well, which, again, yeah, you can argue if he's not 265 pounds, how is he going to handle taking down 265 pound men? But look at someone like Jailton Almeida. Jailton Almeida is a very light heavyweight. So he's a heavyweight fighter, but a lighter version. Let me just clarify that. But the dude just gets takedowns on all the big guys. Like, and when you put the big guy down, the big guy struggles to get back up. So again, I feel like this is a really good move for Vitor Petrino. And I think it's a good fight as well. Like, Austen Lane is a big guy, but I don't think he's like that huge tank of a heavyweight where Petrino is potentially going to have a little bit of a shock with the strength and size type of thing. I think Austen Lane's someone that Vitor Petrino physically is going to be able to handle. So I think that it's a little bit of a settling in type of fight at the division above it, the biggest heavyweight division in the UFC. And I think it works perfectly for him. From a striking perspective, Austen Lane, you know, he can strike. He's super athletic. But I just think Vitor Petrino is going to be a bit faster, a bit more explosive. I think again, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I just think Petrino's the better mixed martial artist in this fight. Like, yeah, Austen Lane's in the UFC, and rightly so. But when you look at just the skill set of mixed martial arts, I think Petrino's just the better fighter. And even if it doesn't go Petrino's way on the feet, which I do think is going to be the better striker, I think Petrino can just shoot takedowns and get Austen Lane down. And I think on top, Petrino will be a nightmare on top for Austen Lane. I think Austen Lane will be trying to struggle to get back up to his feet. And even if he does get back up to a knee against the cage, I think you could potentially see some big ground and pound shots from Petrino, hooking, dragging back down, that type of fight. So, yeah, look, I'm super excited to see Petrino at heavyweight, super excited to see what he actually weighs in at, what he looks like. But I think it's a really good move for him. And I think Austen Lane's a really good welcome to the heavyweight division fight for him as well. So, for those reasons, I'm picking Vitor Petrino to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're staying in the heavyweight division. It seems like we've got a lot of heavyweight fights on this card and another one coming up a little bit later as well. So, yeah, big fun guys on the fight card this weekend. But we've got Junior Tafa versus Tuco Tokkos. Now, my initial thoughts when I saw the betting line on Junior Tafa, I thought, Junior Tafa under minus 200, I'll be all over that. But when you actually look into the fight, like, I'm definitely not as confident as I was, just looking at Tafa at about minus 170. I definitely think that the line should be much shorter. I think, look, if Junior Tafa was sort of like minus 125, minus 130, I think that's probably about right. And I do think there'd be quite a bit of action on him at that line as well, if I'm being honest. So, maybe if he did go down to minus 125, minus 130, he'd only be pushed back up to where he is right now anyway. So, maybe it's a true line that what we're looking at. But I certainly think that he should have concerns betting Junior Tafa at like minus 160, minus 170 here. And the main reason why is you look at his 2 UFC wins that he's got, Parker Porter and Sean Sharif. Now, the Sean Sharif fight, Sean Sharif, I believe, stepped in on short notice, UFC debut. So, obviously, it's not an upper weight class type of job because it's the heaviest weight class. But what you would have expected from Junior Tafa there is to handle the business accordingly. And although he did win, like Sharif had moments in that fight. And I think from a technical perspective, Sharif isn't going to be the most technical guy in the UFC. I think that, that was a fight for Tafa to look really good in. And eventually he did. But in the first round, like, Sharif poured it on Tafa, and Sharif ended up getting tired, and then Tafa took over, and, it was a bit of a shame for Sharif. But, like, I think a lot of people were surprised that Junior Tafa just, again, didn't go out there looking super great and take him out early, which, a lot of people expected that was going to be the case. Now, Tuco Tokkos, on the other hand, he's a fighter that's had 3 fights under the UFC banner, the road to UFC, and then 2 UFC fights. He's lost all 3, but the one thing that you can say about him is, like, against Navajo Sterling, is a fighter that is super hyped right now, who's a massive, massive favourite against Tuco Tokkos. And sure, Tokkos lost, but everybody was expecting Tokkos to lose by KO. Sterling to look unbelievably good, and the fight actually went to a decision. Tokkos got 3 takedowns in the fight. Like, it wasn't a bad performance. And even when you look at the road to UFC fight against Zhang Mingyang, like, Zhang's a really, like, solid fighter that's surging in the heavyweight division right now. And yeah, Tokkos got beat, but Tokkos managed to score a takedown against him as well. And the reason why I'm focusing on the takedowns is because that's essentially how you're going to beat Junior Tafa in this type of fight. Like, Junior Tafa is a good striker, very, very calculated. He's got power. He comes from that striking background, but he can be susceptible to being taken down. And just like his brother, the takedown defense and the get-up game is always going to be developing slightly throughout, every fight camp and every time you train and things like that. But there's still massive holes in both of their games. And obviously we're going to continue talking about just Junior here, but Junior has a hole within the wrestling and grappling defense. And I think Tuco Tokkos has got a path to victory in this fight. And like I say, it's not as if Junior Tafa's been taking out all these high-level guys. Like, his only 2 UFC wins have been against Parker Porter and Sean Sharif, who, no, I'm not trying to discredit them or be disrespectful, but when you look at the heavyweight rankings in the UFC, they are going to be towards the bottom of the UFC rankings. So you can't exactly say that Tafa's been setting the cage alight and getting good wins, and now he's got Tuco Tokkos. Like, I think it's definitely a more even fight than the betting line suggests, and that I initially thought as well before I looked into the fight. I'm still going to pick Tafa. I still think that from a quality perspective, and the biggest gap in skill is within the striking, so that's always something that I do factor quite heavily into where I pick and predict fights to win. So I do think Tafa's going to win the fight, and I do think he's the rightful favourite. I just think the line's gone either a little bit too far, or it's so true that there's no value. But Tuco Tokkos, make no mistake about it, does have a path to victory here. I just think that Tafa, like I say, the biggest gap in skill is on the feet striking, and he might be able to just get at Tokkos, put power on him, maybe force Tokkos on the back foot, maybe make Tokkos hesitant in closing the distance and shooting, and then Tafa should be able to take over the fight. So, yeah, I think it's close and competitive, but I'm siding with Tafa. I'm picking Junior Tafa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Chris Curtis versus Max Griffin. Now, from a betting perspective, this one's odd. Like, Chris Curtis is around minus 300, minus 330, and I just don't know whether it should be that high. Like, yeah, it's strange. I don't think the line should... I don't think Curtis should be as big of a favourite as he is. But on the flip side, I don't know whether, you know, you can really get there with Griffin as an underdog either. It's one of these odd fights that, you know, unless you're throwing Chris Curtis into a parlay just to boost some odds and things like that, you know, I kind of get that aspect if you are playing the fun gambler type of game here. But, you know, Chris Curtis, I just really don't think he's going to look like a minus 300 favourite. Again, spoiler alert, I think he's going to win the fight, and I'm picking him to win the fight. But yeah, I foresee this fight just being quite close and competitive. It's just the reason why Curtis is the rightful favourite, and the reason why you do have to side with him here. For, you know, outside of the skill set perspective, like, he's just fought the better level guys. Like, the fighters that he loses to are fighters who are better than Griffin, so you have to take that into consideration. But Griffin's a dog, man. Like, he'll fight through. He's like awkwardly well-rounded as well. Like, he can strike, wrestle, grapple. The thing is, he's very well-rounded, but not a specialist. So if he does fight a specialist in one of those areas, then he can be found out. So, for example, when he fought Chiesa, Griffin's a decent wrestler-grappler. Chiesa specialises in that area, and that's how Chiesa got him. But, like, from Chris Curtis's perspective, he's predominantly a boxer, but I wouldn't say like he's this elite level boxer. He's just got, you know, decent boxing. He's sharp. He's got volume. You know, he can put power behind his shots. But again, it's like Griffin, I don't think he's going to be completely out of his depth in the striking. I think he's going to be competitive. But then if he starts mixing in wrestling, like, Curtis generally does have good defensive wrestling and grappling, but you can never say never in regards to a fighter getting got at. So if Griffin does shoot takedowns, he might be able to secure a couple. I don't know. It's just, I just find that this fight is just going to be super close, super competitive. I think it's either going to be like a 29-28 Curtis on a competitive fight, or it might even end up being like a close split decision because, you know, like I say, Griffin is very, you know, very aggressive, in your face. He's a dog. He'll be in there. He'll eat a shot to give a shot, and like I say, if he does end up landing some hard shots and be super aggressive on Curtis, maybe that sways some judges over to him. Like I say, you can tell from the tone of my voice, I'm not overly confident in this fight. Like, Chris Curtis should win with his, you know, the level of competition that he's been fighting in the UFC versus the competition that Griffin's been fighting. But like I say, Curtis can go to these close fights. Like, look at when he fought Marc-Andre Barriou. Like, I was super high on Chris Curtis in that fight. Like, I thought Curtis was levels above. He was going to school him. I bet him quite heavily. And the fight just really didn't play out the way I thought it was going to play out. Like, it was so much closer than A, I thought it was going to be, and B, that I think it should have been. So, yeah, Curtis has got this element where he can fight close sometimes as well. Yeah, it's tough. I'm picking Chris Curtis to win the fight, but like I say, it's minus 300. It's too much. I think the fight's going to play out closer than that. So for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I am picking Chris Curtis to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jake Matthews versus Chidi and Njokuani. Now, this is another really close fight as well that I think is super hard to call, because like with Jake Matthews, notoriously Jake Matthews is one of these fighters that will win when you don't expect him to, and then lose when you expect him to win. Like, he'll go on these win streaks where he's beat a couple of fighters in a row that you think that we're going to beat him, and then you're like, okay, well, maybe Matthews has turned a corner now, and then he has that fight where you're like, yeah, he's going to win now after he's just beaten the two fighters he's beaten, and he's definitely going to beat this fighter that's in front of him because maybe they're not quite as there as the previous two fighters, and then he goes in there and loses and doesn't look great, and then you're like, you know, it throws you again, and then in his next fight you think, well, he's just lost against that guy, so, you know, this upcoming fight, probably not going to be there too. And then he puts on an amazing performance. There's just inconsistency there. But the same thing with Chidi and Njokuani. Like, I bet Chidi and Njokuani a lot early into this UFC stint. And like, you know, I won a couple of bets on him because he looked really good. But then I started to lose a couple of bets on him, and he wasn't looking how I thought he was going to look against certain level of opponents. And it's one of them where, you know, he wins a couple and you're massively high on him and you're thinking, this dude's got everything. He's got power, he's got technique, he's even got sneaky good jiu-jitsu. And then he comes in the cage and just doesn't perform, and then he doesn't perform again, and you're like, right, okay, maybe I was wrong about Njokuani, and you start to change your opinion. Then he comes out in his next fight and looks phenomenal. Both fighters are just so hard to get a consistent read on. And then now they're matching up against each other. So how I'm looking at this is I think that Njokuani is going to be definitely the better technical striker. I think he's going to have more power as well. I do worry for Jake Matthews. Like, if Matthews was getting hurt and dropped by Matthew Semmelsberger, then I think that possibility is very likely for Njokuani as well. But then, like I say, does Njokuani pull the trigger? Because where I see Matthews having advantages in this fight is taking him down and getting topside. And then the issue for that with Njokuani is, like, go back to when he fought Albert Doreyev. Doreyev would only shot 1 or 2 takedowns and got a bit of top control time, and suddenly Njokuani just could not pull the trigger on his strikes for the remainder of the fight. He was so concerned with getting taken down and put on his back that he couldn't get back up. And I think Matthews has the potential to have that type of game plan. So again, you know, historically in previous fights, if Matthews does score a couple of takedowns, is Njokuani going to throw those shots that we're thinking that Semmelsberger threw and dropped Matthews with, that Chidi and Njokuani would be able to do? Does he actually throw those shots if he's hesitant of getting taken down? So again, it's, you know, Njokuani's got the advantage from a striking perspective. I think Matthews could get hurt from the strikes, but if Matthews does start to get takedowns, I think he's going to be the better wrestler and topside grappler. I think he's going to be good topside. If Njokuani doesn't get him out, if Matthews doesn't get Njokuani out on the mat and the fight gets back up to the feet, either Njokuani gets up or the next round, is Njokuani even going to throw? Like, it's a real tough one. But I think if this was a pick'em, right, it's not a pick'em, we do have an underdog. So if this was a pick'em and you said to me, look, which fighter would you rather have from a betting perspective? So not which fighter am I going to pick to win, which fighter would you rather put your money on as an underdog in this fight? If it was a pick'em, I would be going with Jake Matthews. I would rather have my money on Jake Matthews as an underdog than Chidi and Njokuani as an underdog. And that's where I'm kind of leaning my pick here, because, like I say, it is an even fight. I'm not going to be shocked if Matthews goes in there and gets sparked out by a hard shot from Njokuani. But I think the fighter that's gritty, grindy, has got the wrestling and grappling upside and can run clocks down and has been in there with, real good guys as well, I'd rather my money be on that fighter as an underdog. So I do think it's, like I say, if Njokuani was the underdog, he's going to be the side to bet, but I'd rather have Matthews as an underdog, and that's where we're at. So that's where my pick's going to be. I'm picking Jake Matthews to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Lauren Murphy versus Eduarda Moura. So Eduarda Moura is a huge favourite here. She's like minus 600, minus 650. Value in that? Probably not. Parlay increaser? Probably. But like I say, it's, you're not going to get much bang for your buck on someone that's minus 600, minus 650 if you're playing it straight. And Lauren Murphy's a bit of a dog fighter. Like, she always makes a presence known inside the cage, and that's about as much as I can say here with Eduarda Moura, because look, Murphy's going to be the better striker in my opinion, more technical boxing. But the thing is, that is what Murphy's good at, the technical boxing, coming forwards in that boxing range. But the thing is, that's a close enough range for Moura to level change and take her down, or get a body lock and trip her down to the mat. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think Moura is going to be big, she's going to be strong, she's going to be physical, she's going to take her down. I think once Murphy's on her back, I just think she's going to struggle here. Like, Moura's a very, very good topside grappler, good blanket grappler, good submissions. Again, very positionally aware, so if her opponent starts to try and sneak out of a gap or a space to get back up to her feet, Moura will block the transition, advance the position herself. So yeah, I think it's a tough fight for Murphy. Murphy absolutely has to keep this fight on the feet if she's going to win. And I just don't think she does. I think Moura will get the takedown she needs. I think she'll get the top control time that she needs. Either, minimum 29-28 does this for 2 rounds without getting her out of there, or she does submit her along the way. So for those reasons, I'm picking Eduarda Moura to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Valter Walker. Now, Valter Walker is a real awkward fighter to get a read on and to analyse, but that doesn't mean he's not a bad fighter. It just means that you don't really know what to expect, but he is a good fighter. Yes, he dropped his UFC debut and, he didn't look great in doing so, but how many fighters have come into the UFC with hype and a good skill set and then dropped the debut where nobody expected him to drop the debut and then gone on this crazy win streak afterwards? It's not something that I put too much stock into. It was his UFC debut and, he did what he needed to do. He got the takedowns that he needed. But ultimately, he just, the fight didn't go his way. And that can happen on your UFC debut. You can't hold it against a fighter, especially if they've shown afterwards that they can get back onto a winning streak. It's just, the thing is with this fight is the fighters that Walker's took out since that loss are not as good as Kennedy and Nzechukwu. So, you've got that element to factor in. Now, Nzechukwu's looked great since moving up to heavyweight. He's one of these fighters that isn't a big heavyweight fighter, and what comes with that is good speed and movement. And, he's packing a little bit of power as well. But again, the fighters that he's beating in the heavyweight division aren't Valter Walker. So this is where we're left here. We're left with a fighter like Valter Walker, whose wins in the UFC aren't as good as Nzechukwu as a fighter, and then we've got Nzechukwu, whose wins in the UFC heavyweight division aren't as good of a fighter as Valter Walker. So, we've got this, in my opinion, relatively even fight that could go either way. You've got Nzechukwu that's going to want to keep this fight standing, pour volume on Valter Walker, potentially look like the better striker, but then you've got Valter Walker that he's going to want to get the fighters down to the mat. He can have this relentless wrestling type of style where he will shoot takedowns on you and has probably got the cardio to do it for 3 rounds. The 5 rounds may be a little bit more difficult, but we don't need to worry about that here. But Valter Walker, one aspect of his game that comes before the wrestling is this dirty, grindy, gritty, ugly, clinch, cage wall wrestling style of fighting. Like, he can stall against the cage but landing just enough shots for the referee not to separate them and do just enough work, separate, then get back to the clinch again. And the thing is with Kennedy and Nzechukwu, not so much at heavyweight, but at light heavyweight, he was involved in some fights where he was getting that happen to him, like he had his back against the cage wall and someone stronger just pinning him there and doing just enough work, and Nzechukwu was struggling to get out. And now up at heavyweight, I think Valter Walker is going to be the naturally stronger fighter. Again, that's always a claim though, like trying to figure out who's going to be the more physical fighter, the stronger fighter inside the cage is almost impossible to predict. But I just think Valter Walker's been the heavyweight for the entire of his career, whereas Nzechukwu was a comfortable light heavyweight that's come up. So, maybe I'm wrong, but I think Valter Walker could be potentially more physical here, push him up against the cage, run the clock down, and again, just start shooting takedowns on Nzechukwu. Now, Nzechukwu's got decent takedown defense, and he will be able to defend some takedowns here against Walker. But again, Nzechukwu has been taken down and he can be got at there at the same time. So it all depends on how good Walker's preparation is going to be from an offensive wrestling perspective. But if Walker does get Nzechukwu down and flattened on the mat, both shoulders on the mat, I just don't know how likely it is that Nzechukwu gets back up. I think Valter Walker does a really good job topside on his opponents. So I think it's a super close fight. I could genuinely see a world where Nzechukwu keeps the fight standing, out-volumes Walker and wins comfortably. But I could also see a world where Walker pins Nzechukwu against the cage, doesn't allow Nzechukwu to get any work or much work going at all, scoring the odd takedown here and there, and again, winning quite comfortably. I could also see a world where Nzechukwu wins 1 round, Walker wins 1 round, and then another round is super close. to the point where we don't know which way the judges are going to score it. I could also see a world where every single one of the rounds is super close, and again, we don't know which way the judges are going to score it. So I just think it's one of these fights that I think should be a 50-50 type of fight, and it's not from a betting perspective. We've got Valter Walker that's, sort of like a small to moderate underdog in this fight, and I think when you're looking at that, you have to side with the underdog because, the fight could play out in so many different ways, and I think every single way, apart from if there's a definitive winner either side, it could play out quite close. But like I say, I could see a definitive Walker win, I can see a definitive Nzechukwu win, and I can see it being quite close if neither of those two outcomes play out. So yeah, I feel like it's one of these fights that could play out in many different ways. And for that, I think pre-fight, I don't think you can be massively confident on either side, but you've got a somewhat moderate underdog here, and I think that's the way you have to go with it. So for those reasons, I'm picking Valter Walker to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got Mike Davis versus Mitch Ramirez. So Mike Davis is a massive favourite in this fight, and you can understand why. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Mike Davis, I think, is better everywhere, better striker, better wrestler, better grappler, better athlete. I think he's got more power, more ways to finish this fight, more likely to finish this fight. I don't really see too much upside for Ramirez in this fight. I mean, you can never really say never, I suppose. Like, every fighter's got that puncher's chance, and every fighter can also have an off night as well. But I kind of feel like for Mike Davis to lose this fight, he's going to have a seriously off night, or be coming into the cage with some crazy injury that doesn't allow him to perform at the level that he needs to. Because regardless, look, Ramirez is in the UFC, and you have to respect that. Like, he's a UFC caliber fighter. But like I say, from how they match up, it's just such a difficult matchup stylistically, physically for Ramirez to win, that he is going to need Mike Davis to have an off night or come in with some crazy injury that makes him unable to perform at the level that he needs to win a UFC fight. But outside of that, I think Ramirez really does struggle. I mean, of course, he could also catch him with a 4-ounce glove and hurt him, knock him out, or, start the process of the knockout, like a knockdown, and damaging somebody heavily can change the course of a fight. But the bottom line here is that type of fight playing out, needing those intangibles to sort of come into play, it's a real low percentage probability that type of outcome happens in this fight. I don't think you can look past Mike Davis at all. I think he looks great against Mitch Ramirez. I think he gets Mitch Ramirez out of there, or it's like a super dominant, like 30-26 or 30-25 type of fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Mike Davis to win this fight. And in the last fight to break down on the card, we've got Fatima Kline versus Melissa Martinez. Now, Fatima Kline is still one of my favourite prospects in the UFC. I mean, at 24 years old, she's got an entire career ahead of her, and she's already got, like, in my opinion, close to an elite skill set. Like, her Muay Thai is super good. Her wrestling is good. Her grappling's probably the best aspect of a game. Like, she's so well-rounded. She can win fights striking. She can win fights wrestling and grappling. Of course, it didn't go her way against Jasmine Jasvidicius, but it was a UFC debut, short notice, upper weight class. All those three things that go against fighters getting into the UFC. But, for Fatima Kline, I just feel like with Melissa Martinez, actually, we'll start with her. Melissa Martinez actually came to the UFC with a bit of hype around her as well. The striking was good, the wrestling and grappling work in progress, but, she was young when she came to the UFC. Now she's 27. She's had a few years out in between fights, and I just feel that, it's now or never for Melissa Martinez. She is it's not as if, like, she's old and declined, but she's starting to enter her prime. It's just the difficulty is, if she starts to rack up a couple of losses here before she hits her prime, then she might not get that prime in the UFC. And I feel like this is a real bad stylistic fight for Martinez, because although Martinez is a good striker and she's going to be competitive with Kline striking, like, Kline's a real good striker as well, good Muay Thai style, but I do think Martinez can, I wouldn't say match her, but definitely be competitive. Like, if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, the fight runs close. But the thing is, Kline's got good striking in general to beat Martinez from a striking perspective if need be. But then when you start adding in the wrestling and grappling, that's where Melissa Martinez has got a hole in a game. And Kline is just so good in regards to the grappling. So I genuinely think that there's a massive gap in skill with the grappling. Everything else, the wrestling, again, goes to Kline, but the striking, I feel like, is probably the most competitive aspect of this fight. But again, I still wouldn't, disregard Kline winning a 15-minute kickboxing fight here either. So I think stylistically it's tough for Martinez, because if Kline does decide to start shooting takedowns and get this fight down to the mat, which I anticipate she's going to, then I just think Martinez is going to be out of a depth with Kline on top, and Kline will either control on top, at least, again, as I say always, at least 2 out of 3 rounds with top control time, potentially 3 out of 3, and also potentially get a finish on top as well. So, yeah, tough fight for Martinez. Can't look past Kline. She's a massive favourite as well, which you can understand. For those reasons, I'm picking Fatima Kline to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for everybody listening and tuning in. If you're on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, any of the podcast platforms, you can pop over to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. And in there, you can find the video, and you can also drop a comment to the video as well. So you can tell me who you're betting on, who you like, a parlay that you like, a specific underdog that you like. If there's going to be a massive shock on the card, who do you think the big favourite is that's going to lose? Anything that you want to do. It is me that gets back to the replies throughout the week. I always try my best to get back to everybody, even though I do have busy weeks. But like I say, drop a comment, let's talk, let's chat. And like I say, it really helps our algorithms as well for YouTube, the more that people interact. So again, whilst you're on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button also. Like I say, it's free, doesn't cost you a penny. You get notifications every week when we release the video on the podcast platforms and YouTube as well. So yeah, free to do, really helps us out, helps the algorithms. And again, I always appreciate every bit of support. And just before we go, one last time, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler. Everything's super affordable as well. We're not one of these platforms that's going to charge $700-800 a year or anything like that. If you want to take advantage of our yearly subscription, it's just $99. Super cheap, super affordable. Our ethos is that we want you to make the money back that you spend with us as quickly as you possibly can, so you can start profiting on your bets. If we've got packages up at $700-800 for the year, then it's going to take some people a long time to make that money back before they can start profiting. And then, what's the point of the service at that point? So everything's super affordable. It's $5 for one event, $10 a month, or $99 for a full 12 months, for a full year. And that's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.